Hello everyone, welcome back to the another Nuke tutorial, and we are going to take a look at the motion blur system inside Nuke. So as you know guys, inside Nuke we can apply motion blur in many ways. So there is no one way you can apply motion blur to your CG or your comp or anything you want to add a motion blur. There are a few nodes which directly apply motion blur, and we have a few nodes they can generate a motion blur pass so that we can use to apply a motion blur. So as you can see, we have this script, and I will explain you motion blur system inside Nuke and which one you can apply and where you can apply. So this is the Nuke motion blur guide. So let's get started, and as you can see I have this script. Let's see the first one. So as you can see this backdrop, the motion blur supported and generation nodes. So basically if I zoom in, you will see we have these many nodes. Some of the nodes can apply motion blur directly, and some of the nodes we have to add some extra node and then you can apply a motion blur. As you can see in the first row, so these are the 2D nodes. So the transform, the corner pin, the tracker and the roto, and then we have the scan line and the 3D card and the camera shake. And as you can see now we have this vector node. So these are the nodes we can use to generate a motion pass, so that we can use to apply a motion blur. Okay, so if you did any transformation with the transform or corner pin, you will see we have this motion blur here. So if you just increase this one and make sure your shutter offset is center and just increase motion blur to 1, so it will apply a motion blur directly. So this you will see in all the transformation. See here we also have, and in the tracker if you go to the transform, we also have a motion blur here also. And then we have roto, and we have a scan line and all that. In the camera shake we also have the same thing, just like the transform, because the camera shake is a transform node. If you take a look at the here, this is also a transform node. And the rotos, we have a motion blur here. As you can see the motion blur tab, and you can apply a motion blur through this layer here. And we have this vector generator and the smart vector and this motion to vector. I will let you know how to use this one. And then we have this motion blur 2D and motion blur 3D and the motion blur node. So this motion blur you can directly plug in your input, and it will apply motion blur directly, and you can just mess around the shutter sample and the shutter time. So this need to be 0.5, and this you can increase the sample, so like maybe 10. And these are the nodes we will talk about in this tutorial, how to use them. This vector blur also. So these are the nodes we have here. They can apply motion blur directly to your input plate, or you can generate a motion pass and then you can apply it. They have a few advantage and disadvantage. So just like the transform, you don't have much control here. The motion blur amount and all that, you just need to add one and you good to go. It's based on the transformation. So just like 50 and 80, so it's based on the transformation how this is animated. So I have an example here, so it will clear your doubt. So as you can see in the first one, I am just animating this roto shape. As you can see here, basically animated like I'm just making this in out. Okay, so as you can see it's animating like this, and as you can see it's and it don't have any motion blur yet, so we have to apply a motion blur. So I'm going this frame. So, and in the roto you always have this motion blur section, just enable it, and as you can see now we have a correct motion blur according to the animation path. So if you go here to the motion blur, you can see by default it's set to motion blur 1, and as you can see the shutter is center and the shutter offset like the shutter is 0.5. So if I increase 2, as you can see nothing is happening, because it's based on your keyframe, based on your motion animation. As you can see, if your animation is not fast, so you don't get too much motion blur. As you can see, based on the animation path. So as you can see, so this is the one way you can apply motion blur. And as you can see, this one we are using a transform. If I just disable the motion blur, as you can see the same animation we have here, but with the transform. So in the transform we have a translation animated. As you can see, if I go this frame, if I zoom in a little bit, if I increase this motion blur 1, as you can see it's apply a motion blur, but as you can see it's so pixelated. So to increase this quality you have to increase this one. So if I increase this 5, so you will see it's getting better. So I increase 10, see now it's getting much better. So if I increase, so this is basically like sampling. So make it 1, you get a motion blur, but it's very noisy. Okay, so if I make a 0.5, here you can see the same motion blur but very noisy. So if I 0.1, as you can see the motion blur is same, but only the sampling is reducing, it's getting noisy. Okay, if I increase 1, it's getting better, but the amount of motion blur is same. So if you want to increase the motion blur, you have to play around with the shutter. As you can see, if I increase shutter 1, you get a wider motion blur, but it's always recommend to make the 0.5. Okay, and you can increase this one like 5 and you have much better edges. And so this is the second option. Okay, so in this third one, as you can see, we have this I'm just disabling. So in this one we have a same animation, but we have now this motion blur node here. So if I enable this one, so this is the setting I am applying. So by default it's saying 3 samples and this is 0.73 I think. Yeah, so as you can see, because the sample is 3, you are getting a 3 samples, 3 steps. You can increase up to 10 and make the shutter time 0.5 here as well. So now you get very smooth motion blur here. As you can see, now it will update. So as you can see, but still you can see this stepping. So we need to increase this sampling, but it's very slow. So this motion blur node is very slow. So always do a pre-comp after your motion blur. And now we can use this motion blur 2D node. So as you can see, this motion blur node, if I view this one, it will not do anything. So the idea of using this motion blur 2D and the motion blur 3D node, we have to generate what we call the output UV motion path. So by default it's setting motion. So we can output a motion here. If you go here, we have a motion layer. If I view here, we have this motion layer, as you can see, but currently we don't have any information here. It's black because it's require a 2D transform. As you can see, this input, so we need a transform just like here. So if I copy this transform here and paste it here, so this transform have the same animation as my roto. Where you get this transform, you can basically, if you have this input, you can just drag this one and then you can get a transform, but it requires a 2D transform like this. As you can see, it's following the same thing. So what I can do, I can plug this one here, just a 2D transform. And now if I view my channel, as you can see, now I have some information here. Now we have a motion information here to this animation path, as you can see. So we need to apply a motion blur here. For that we can use this vector blur. So the vector blur we can use, vector blur can read that motion channel and then we can apply the motion blur through the vector blur. So in the vector blur, I'm just unchecking the GPU. First thing, we need to select the UV channel. So we already have a motion, so we can use this one, and here we have a motion amount, just make it 1. And as you can see, you will get this kind of issue. So why we are getting? Because of the bounding box. So if your element have a very tight bounding box like this one, as you can see, it's very tight, then because there is no room for the motion blur, so it's getting stretched. But we applied motion blur, but here it's cutting and it basically is stretching this last pixel. So to avoid that, we need to increase this bounding box to the input plate, whatever your input plate have. One thing we can do, we can add a reformat and cover up this entire frame, but it's totally waste of the pixel, because we don't want to Nuke to read this black pixel because there is no information here. So what we can do, we can add the node which is called adjust B box, as you can see, this one. So it's basically adding pixel information. I mean, it's basically increasing your bounding box. So currently it's 25, I'm making 50, so I'm basically increase this bounding box. So now if I view my motion vector blur, now it's perfect because we have a room for the motion blur. So as you can see, before and after. So now if we view the motion blur, as you can see, it's very smooth, and we just increase the amount 1. We don't need to increase too much to get the smoothest result. So this is the smoothest, and we don't see any noise and anything. And on top of that, you can increase more, and it will increase more motion blur, as you can see. And as you can see, the shutter is already 0.5. And if you check the motion blur 2D node, I set it here 0.5 and shutter speed center, so the vector blur can read all the information. then we can apply a correct motion blur through the motion blur 2D and the vector blur. So this is the 2D way, as you can see. So in this one we can directly apply with the roto and anything if it is supported, and then we can use the transformation here. And third one, if you don't have any transformation, anything like that on your plate, so you can use motion blur, so it will automatically calculate the motion and it will apply a motion blur. But it's heavy note, so you need to, it's completely depend on the shot. That's why we have many options in a Nuke to apply a motion blur. So this is the one way, and then this is the 2D way. I mean, you need a transformation, then you can apply this through the vector blur. Now we have this nodes which we call the vector generator. How to use them? So as you can see in this one, I have this footage of this girl, and basically she is walking in slow motion, and as you can see there are not a lot of motion blur because this footage is slow motion. So as you can see in every frame we can see the hair perfectly. So we need to add a motion blur here, so let's see how we can do that. So as you can see, I directly plug in the vector generator node. In this one you can increase the vector detail to 1, and I set it by default strength, whatever the 1.5. And if we view this one, now if you go to the channel, we also have this we have this motion layer. So it's loading and it will show you exactly how the pixel is moving around. So this vector generator is basically calculating pixel information from the current frame and the previous frame and the after frame. So as you can see, we have the pixel information, how the pixel is changing in this frame. Now we can use in a vector blur. So as you can see, if I use in a vector blur, we are getting a nice motion blur. So as you can see, so only where the motion is there, only a motion blur will apply. As you can see, it's not applying here because there is no motion here according to this frame. Only the hair is getting a motion blur, as you can see. So this is the best part of this vector generator. It's basically calculating the entire frame, and if you find a motion, if you find a pixel is changing a lot from previous frame and the current frame, so it will apply a motion blur there only. As you can see, we're not applying motion blur here in the background too much, but we are applying most of the motion blur in the hair and only this character basically, as you can see. And then obviously we need to remove the channel, so I added a remove and keep only the RGB. The same thing we can use here, the smart vector. We can use smart because it's generating vector, so you directly view from here. You only have the smart vector and you can't use this one directly to the vector blur because it's a vector, but it's not a motion. So we need to convert this one. So for that we have this motion, we have this vector to motion. You can plug this one, and then if you view here, we have this motion layer. Now we have a motion layer, so we can use this in a vector blur to add a motion blur. So the biggest difference in this one, so the biggest difference if you find in the vector generator, you can directly plug this one and it will also outputting the RGB value, and then you can apply a vector blur. But the smart vector, we don't get RGB value, we only get this one. So we need to copy this one. We need to use a copy node to add this motion layer into our B pipe. So now we have this one here, and then you can use this vector blur. If you and the result will be the same. I mean, the motion blur is the same, and in the vector generator and the smart vector, because they both generating the vector. As you can see, if I compare 1 and 2, as you can see, they both are identical, and I put it the same setting as we have here, 1 and all that. It's the same vector blur I copy from here to here. So we have a same vector generator and same motion blur. Okay, so the same case, as you can see, I have this waterfall, and we don't have much motion blur here. You can use the vector generator, the vector blur, and you can add the motion blur, and it will look very nice and very smooth. So as you can see, I'm not adding a lot, so just to show you the point. As you can see, it's only applying on this waterfall because the only pixel is changing on here. Apart from that, the pixel is not changing here. So because this is a very static, so as you can see, there is no motion blur here, only motion blur on the water where the pixel are changing, as you can see. So this is the best part using the vector generator or the smart vector. So we are calculating the pixels in every frame according to their values basically, and it will generate a vector. You can use this one in a vector blur basically. So same setup here, copying the motion path and applying the vector blur. As you can see, same result we are getting, but this thing we need to add a copy node, and then we can use this one because we need to add in our B pipe. because it's not outputting the RGB. So the same result, as you can see, 1 2, same result we are getting here. And the third example here, this one is pretty good. As you can see, this guy is running. What is basically happening? So I'm just see is running like that. And the frame I want to show you is this one. See, he's jumping here. Yeah, this frame. And let's use the vector generator and the vector blur, and as you can see, it's applying motion blur very nicely. You can use here the motion blur node also. You can use this one also. If I plug this one directly here, and let's increase the sample 10 and make the shutter 0.5. If I compare this to this, and let's see, as you can see, so the vector generator and the vector blur, we are getting this kind of motion blur, and as you can see, and the motion blur is not giving much of the motion blur. As you can see, it's not giving that much. So I think what we need to do, we need to reduce this one, the shutter time. I think then we can get a motion blur. So as you can see, that's why this vector generator and the vector blur is doing a very good job. As you can see, we are not getting much, so I think I need to increase this one. Let's see. So it's completely depend on the shot and the situation, because sometimes this motion blur node is giving pretty good result and very quick. So as you can see here, it's applied a motion blur, but it's not perfectly applied, just blurring the edges. It's not giving the direction where the motion is going in this on the character. So if I disable this one, and as you can see, this one is giving much better result. As you can see, only the character, nothing else, because this shot is static. So same thing here, smart vector also doing the same thing. So the advantage of using smart vector, you can basically do the smart vector thing. You can distort and everything, and then you can also use this one to add a motion blur. So this smart vector you can use in multiple ways. Render the smart vector, you can use this node, and you can add a motion blur also, and you can track and all that stuff. So as you can see, the same result we are getting here and here. As you can see, they both are similar. Now we covered this one. So we covered this 2D one and the rotos and the vector generator and all these nodes. So now let's take a look at this scanline render, card 3D and the camera shake. Here I have example here. So just quickly view this scene. So in this one, I have this scene here. I placed a cube, sphere and the plane, and we have this animated camera. So if I plug this one also in the scene, so as you can see, we have this camera and it's animated like that. So as you can see, it's animated like that. So I can show you what is going on in the motion blur. Unplug this. Now in the scanline render, how you can apply a motion blur. So if you have a 3D scene from your scanline render, if you render like 2D elements or anything on your card and something like that. So as you can see, I have this scene in this frame. So if I play, you will see this is what we have. This is the camera motion we have, and let's apply a motion blur. So because this is the 3D scene, so we are very flexible to apply a motion blur. Let's see the one by one how you can apply a motion blur. Let's go this frame. Okay, and first in the scanline render, we have this multi-sampling, and this is the sample we need to increase. As you can see, by default the shutter is 0.5 and the center offset. So if I increase this one, let's see 10. So as you can see, we now have a motion blur. But if I zoom in a bit, you will see the sample, because now we are using a 10 sample. Now as you can see, it's not a smooth. So to get a perfect smooth, you need to increase a lot. As you can see, I increase the 20, but still I can see the lines. So this advantage of using this one is very slow. You need to increase this value a lot, I mean the 50 or 100 maybe, to get a very smooth line. And then if you render this one, it will take a lot of, hell lot of time to render a single frame. So this is not a very efficient way to use this scanline render for the motion blur. What we can do in the next step, as you can see, you can use a vector blur. Okay, here in the scanline render, if you go here and in the shader tab, as you can see, we have this motion vector here. So there are a lot of new way we can add a motion blur, but I'm using the classic one. Just select this one, and in the motion channel just use this motion channel. That's it. Now if you view your motion channel here, as you can see, now we have we have information about the camera motion. So it's basically like we are rendering the motion path from a 3D. If you ever done CG comping, they are providing this motion layer also. So just like in the 3D, we are also rendering through scanline render. So we are basically outputting this layer. So we can use this one in the vector blur. So if I apply a vector blur, and as you can see, I increase the amount only 2, and all the settings are the same. If you view here, just let it load. So as you can see, only the 2 samples, we are getting very smooth result, as you can see. And if I make it 1, it's also giving very smooth result. If I increase 3, we are basically increasing the motion blur. As you can see, it's very nice. And you can check normalize if it's working, but sometimes it's giving some artifacts. So as you can see, it's giving some artifacts. So make sure, just check whether it's working or not. So in this case, it's not working. So this is the one way you can apply motion blur with the scanline render if you have a motion pass from a 3D department. So assume this is a 3D scene, and if they give you a motion pass, so you can use a vector blur and you can directly apply it. There is no issue you going to face. Now the third step, in this one we are using this motion blur 3D. Okay, so this is a 3D scene. Okay, and if you have a match move camera from the match move department, okay, and they don't give you the motion pass, then you can use the camera to generate a motion pass based on the camera movement. You can use vector blur, you can use a vector generator here also, but if you have a camera, that will be very good. In this case, I have a camera here. I can use this motion blur 3D node, and I can plug this one here, and just like that. So if I unplug this one, so in the motion blur 3D you get camera input and this main input. Just plug this one here and this camera input to the camera input, and inside make sure you are outputting this one, and in the shutter always 0.5 and make a center offset. And we have some more settings here, like this distance and this Z input. If you have your depth channel, you can also add here, so it will calculate based on the depth. It will apply a motion blur based on the depth, so you can use that also here. And if I view vector blur now, you will see we are applying a motion blur through this motion blur 3D node using a camera input. So as you can see, you are getting this kind of result. Okay, so here I set it a 0.1, and in the motion blur 3D, one setting you need to change this distance. So as you can see, this currently is telling is 1. Basically it's meaning it's too close to the camera, so we need to increase this one. So let's say I increase the 5, and let's see what is happening. So as you can see, I increase the 5 and it's getting better. So let's increase 2 and let's see. So this parameter, you need to check the object you are applying a motion blur in a 3D space, how far it is. So basically calculating according to the depth. So as you can see, the 2 is not good, so I think the 5 is good, so I keep it like 5. And if I zoom in a bit, as you can see, now we are applied a motion blur through this motion blur 3D, and in the vector blur I can increase the motion blur here. It's pretty flexible, so that's why always try to use motion blur as much as possible, because it's very flexible. You can do a lot of changes here in your motion channel, and then you can apply a motion blur. These are the way you can apply a motion blur. And lastly, we have this card here. I placed this card, so I'm quickly merge this one to this to show you. So I place it quickly here, and as you can see, if I rotate, so this is just a noise, and we are using this one. It's basically like we are doing a image plane. If I double click, we are getting a 3D gizmo here, and we're getting all these settings, and inside we also have this motion blur. As you can see, we can apply this one through this motion blur. So as you can see, it's 1 we don't have. Increase this one, and we have a motion blur, but we need to increase this sampling. So I can increase this too, and it's getting better and better as I increase this motion blur value. This card also have a this motion blur option. And lastly, we can use this camera shake. Okay, so let's copy this one, camera shake, and let's quickly apply to which image we can apply. Let's apply it to this roto and I will show you what is going on. So let's quickly apply here. So as you can see now we have this motion blur of this object and we also have a camera shake. So let's increase the camera shake a bit, maybe 50, and let's increase the frequency also. Let's make it 100. Let's make it 50 and open this one, and let's increase this Y value, maybe 100. So as you can see now we have this object motion blur, and now we have in the camera shake we also getting a motion blur from this camera. As you can see, because this is the one, we are getting a motion blur, but we need to increase this one. So you can use this one and you can increase the value like that, and we are good to go. And another way we can use, just remove this one. So this is a transform. Okay, so always remember this is a transform node. So what we can do, we can use this motion blur 2D node. So I'm just copying this one, motion blur 2D, and we can apply it here. And we need a transform node, so I'm just adding a one dot here, just plugging this dot here, and you can plug this one also here. This is a transform node and we are using this one, the same input. So now here we are getting these values, the motion channel. And let's quickly check the settings. So make sure it's center, and then we can use a vector blur here. So we don't need to increase a sampling and anything like that, just use vector blur and increase this motion blur amount. And as you can see now we are getting a motion blur, as you can see, very nice and very smooth. What this normalize is doing, yeah, it's not doing anything. So as you can see, I think I messed up the offset. Yeah, see now, I mean, you can basically render your motion paths and you can save it in your drive and you can use it anywhere, or you can manipulate your motion paths here and you can use in a vector blur in a many ways basically. So this is a very flexible way and very controllable way to use a motion blur using this vector blur. Make sure if you are if you can use a vector blur when you are applying a motion blur. Sometimes we are hurry, so we can use this motion blur node directly and you can apply through this one. And this motion blur 2D also is very useful. So all these motion generated nodes use as much as you can, because they give you a flexibility to manipulate the motion amount and in a vector blur also. And the motion channel you can use in a many ways. Like for example, if I generate this motion layer, as you can see here, I generated this vector layer, so I can use this one in eye distort also. So if I use eye distort here and just plug directly here in the side, and in the UV channel I'm using this motion layer, and as you can see, based on the vectors I can basically distort my image. Okay, so as you can see, it's basically doing distortion, so you can use that also. So if I increase this offset, sorry, this scale, as you can see, based on my vectors I can basically distort my image, as you can see how I want. So there are many ways of using this using a vectors in Nuke. So always use a vector generator or basically the motion generated node, so you can use in a many ways. I hope you learn about motion blur inside Nuke. If you still have any doubt how to use this kind of node and way to use it, basically depend on the situation. So as I show you this 2D way and the vector generator way and this 3D way, so these are the ways you can, these are the cases where you can use these nodes according to your shots basically. So I hope you learned something. Please let me know in the comment and we will see you in a very next one. Thank you for watching.